Hello, my name is Max, and I'll be talking to you the crucial role that former African slaves turned pirates the role that they would play in these pirate ships during the Golden Age of Piracy. Around this time, uh, the West Indies was beginning to form up with all the colonies that were being established by European powers, especially the big three that controlled majority of them: Spain, France, and Britain. These countries would go ahead and establish these colonies. They would expand. They would expand trade, depending on what raw trade goods that they found while exploring and expanding their empires. And also, this would help rake in all kinds of profits for the European powers across the Atlantic. To go ahead and reap the benefits of all of this, be it sugarcane, cotton, or certain fruits or vegetables that are not native to Europe, the European powers would, of course, buy slaves from Africa. Uh, and during this time, with all the profits and everything being raked in, these merchant ships that carried all these goods made really ripe targets for pirates. Uh, and often or not, when pirates would attack these merchant ships, if of course they would help themselves to whatever goods that were worth something on these ships, but every once in a while they would also come across a small group of slaves on these ships, and surprisingly, these slaves are actually worth more than the goods that this merchant ship is carrying. And when it came to seeing these slaves, the pirates would actually offer them a choice. Uh, well, they would technically offer them two choices, but there's no negative side to it. The first choice was that they offered them to join their crew, and upon joining their crew, they would be treated like a normal human being and work as a pirate to go ahead and continue hunting and pillaging European ships of whatever respective power that they were targeting at the time. If some slaves did not want to join the pirates, that was okay as well. They went ahead and still allowed them on their ship, and they would drop them off to a haven of some sort, so where they can go ahead and work from there to see if they want to establish a life for themselves without having to be in chains. For this part, the big haven where the slaves would be dropped off most of the time was Nassau, which was the big pirate haven during the time. Uh, for the former slaves that became pirates, they would prove to play a crucial role in these crews. One of the reasons that helped them play a crucial part on these pirate crews was how they were treated like humans again. The minute when they were captured by slavers, their humanity was taken away from them. They were treated like property. They were treated like animals. They were treated as something that wasn't human, only as something that is worth a lot of money, and it's also something that can help break in even more profits for whatever respected country owns you at the time. These pirate crews were the very first place in history where a former African slave got any kind of equality whatsoever. And as far as pirate ships go, the long list of equal rights and everything extended throughout the crew. There was no special treatments regarding what rank you were in the crew. If you were a captain, a quartermaster, a boatswain, even a cook, everyone was treated with the exact same amount of respect. You weren't judged on what country you were born in. You weren't judged on what ethnicity you were, what religion you were. It didn't really matter to these pirates as long as you just continue working for them. Their pirates' main theme is revenge, and by revenge, as in their revenge against a European power that forced them to be something that they're not. And what better way to go ahead and do that is to basically rob said European powers of their fabulous amounts of wealth that they're raking in from the West Indies. The thing that we need to know about pirates before I get into how former slaves were treated on these pirate ships. Most pirates around this time were former privateers. Privateers are basically the gentleman version of a pirate, I guess if you can call it that, or they were Yeah, let's just say the gentleman pirate. Uh, Gentleman pirates in the scenario, as each respected European power, especially the big three, had privateers at their disposal. The main goal of these privateers was to rob a rival country's merchant ship of their profits, of their belongings, and sometimes even just the entire ship, and to go ahead and add it into their navy. Of course, during this time, the European powers were actually okay with this because they were in constant conflict with each other, to the point that it's just they're just doing it for laughs at this point. Uh, when it came to these privateers, you were allowed to hunt down particular countries' ships, and if by any chance you happened to be overpowered by the ship that you were hunting, or you got caught or you got captured, uh, all these privateers would not get in trouble as long as they had a letter of marque, a written agreement from their respected governments saying it's okay, I can go ahead and hunt this. I'm a privateer, as long as they had the letter. If they did not have the letter, they would have been shot on the spot or taken to a nearby colony where they would be tried and hung for piracy, basically, because they don't technically have the proof from their government to go ahead and say, oh, it's okay if I do this. Yeah, privateers would not receive any kind of punishment whatsoever. Upon capturing these privateers, whoever caught them was begrudgingly supposed to send them back to their ships and just continue on with their day. That's basically it as far as privateers go. But soon the privateering started to become a little costly, to the point that most European powers began to outlaw privateering, which left a decent chunk of some of the navies in Europe without a job, because their main job and main source of income was to rob and pillage these ships. And also, when it came to hiring these sailors that would work for the respected European powers, it was actually somewhat akin to African slaves. These navies would often kidnap basically anyone that they would see that would be deemed fit to serve on a ship. It could be anyone from a popular merchant to a criminal, to a lowly soldier, to even the town drunk. These navies would kidnap anyone as long as they served a role and a purpose on these ships to continue stealing the awards of other European powers. Once privateering and sorry about that. Okay. Once these navies had their use of the sailors that they hired, they would not take them home. They would not take them to the place where they were kidnapped. They would literally just go to the nearest habited island. They would go to the nearest colony, anywhere where it was the earliest convenience, where they would literally just drop them off at this colony or whatever, give them their weeks or months' pay, and just say, okay, see ya, and just maroon them there practically. This, of course, made a lot of sailors angry because of how they were practically kidnapped and forced into servitude. Granted, they were paid and still kind of treated like humans, unlike African slaves, but it still made them angry because they were separated from their home. They were subjugated to something that they did not want to be part of. And this kind of thing actually harmonizes with former African slaves. On these ships, like I said, former African slaves pirate ships were the first place where they were treated like human beings. They were allowed to vote. Pirates usually voted on who could be captain, who could be quartermaster, or whatever. They were allowed to vote. They were allowed to even become these ranking officials on their ships. A former African slave could become a captain. A former African slave could become a cook or a quartermaster or anything. They were like the rest of the pirates. They received compensation should they get injured while they were hunting merchant ships. Pirates mainly, their main goal was revenge against whatever European power that has wronged them. That was the main reason why they hunted these merchant ships down. And of course, like I said, this harmonizes with the former slaves because, hey, they were basically taken from their homes, their families, their loved ones, put in chains, tossed into a ship, sailed all across the Atlantic to go work to death in some plantation or mine that was owned by Spain or Britain or whatever. Excuse me. And having experienced that humanity again, it basically had the former slaves turned pirates. It would make them fight even harder because they've already lost their humanity a first time, and they will literally die trying if that humanity is taken away from them. Because in the instance when certain governments managed to capture these pirate ships, basically sorry about that. Basically, any kind of colonial or basically Caucasian sailors or Chinese, they would be tried like normal pirates. They would be tried. Some would be pardoned. Some would be hanged. Some would be shot. It doesn't really matter. But when they came across African pirates, unless the African pirate is notoriously known, which I will get to one notoriously known former African slave turned pirate soon. These former slaves would just be sent back to whatever plantation that they were supposed to be on, and basically just continue working until they basically die. Having that feeling of humanity placed back into their hands after it being violently ripped from them, it made them extremely ferocious fighters, to the point that on these ships, former African pirates would fight to the death all the time, and they would show how ferocious they were to these sailors. One of the main things that actually helped out pirates while hunting these ships is to impose fear into whatever you're hunting. If if these British sailors see a group of former African slaves just slaughtering all kinds of European sailors, and with all this mass hysteria and havoc, it scares them to the point that it's much easier for them just to put their hands up and just surrender. And in terms of them adapting to pirate life, they heavily enjoyed the other pirate mythos, where pirates were all about lived lives of pleasure and freedom, not one of labor, especially under a government that is a full ocean away that's telling you what to do when you can be in charge of whatever you want to do. And most of the time, when it came to these pirates, and this went for all kinds of pirates, they usually not wasted. Once they got their profits, a fair majority of them would spend all their profits in one sitting, either on women, booze, food, and maybe just a smidge of supplies. But other than that, once they're out of coin, it's back to the sea and continue hunting and rinse and repeat. The African pirates, their ferocious fighting skills and how brutal that they could be, this caught the attention of a lot of pirate captains, and this was when former African slaves would become a portion of the vanguard, basically the very first wave of pirates that would get onto a ship that they were boarding. And ironically, this was the most lethal part of the job, because since you're the first one going over on the other ship, you are more likely to die the minute you get onto the other ship, or just by standing up, because you're just the first one of the group. But the point of the vanguard was to come at you fast and hard. Basically, this, of course, instilled fear into the sailors, and once other pirates began to join the fights, so one by one these sailors would surrender, and of course the pirates would help reap in the reward. Now, to talk about a famous African slave turned pirate is a former war chief that was in Africa. He is known as Blqck Ceasar. Blqck Ceasar was a former war chief who had his own tribe. He had his own land. He had his own everything in Africa. Multiple times he eluded slavers until Multiple times he eluded slavers, and in the instances where he did fight slavers, he was especially known for his humongous size. It's rumored that he had the strength of 10 men, and he was insanely smart and extremely ruthless. Basically, embodying the stereotype of how Europeans believe that natives from another country were just savages. He embodied that stereotype. But he would sadly be captured by slavers after a slaver showed him a gold watch and lured him onto a ship. Thinking nothing of it, Blqck Ceasar and some of his men went onto the ship, where the captain showed him even more riches, as well as food, drink, and women, of course. And as Blqck Ceasar and his men were enjoying themselves, the slave captain ordered his crew to raise the anchor and set sail for the West Indies. Once Blqck Ceasar and his men found out what was going on, it was too late. They had guns and swords on them, and they were placed in chains and sent below the deck with the rest of the slaves that they captured. Blqck Ceasar would refuse to eat anything. He would refuse to drink anything. He would bring himself on the brink of starvation because he honestly wanted to die on this ship. He did not want to continue being a slave, and he was perfectly fine with that. However, he made a interesting friendship with one of the sailors on this ship. This sailor, seeing how sickly he was, would offer him food. He would offer him drinks, so much to the point that, of course, Blqck Ceasar started to accept it, and soon enough, he would not accept food or water from anyone except that particular sailor. Now, as they were nearing the West Indies, a hurricane struck their ship, and in the skirmish, which their ship would eventually be destroyed by the hurricane, the sailor would set Blqck Ceasar and some of his men free. He and Blqck Ceasar managed to get into a lifeboat and paddle to a nearby island, which would later be called Caesar's Rock. I think it's located somewhere around Elliott Key, or a point on an island. Once the storm passed, these two began lives as pirates. When it came to their form of pirating, their main method that they used was to fake being shipwrecked. They would go ahead and basically just go in a lifeboat and kind of go out towards sea once they saw a merchant ship coming in. And once the merchant ship picked them up, they basically would just pull out their weapons and hold the ship hostage, rob them of any kind of valuables, supplies, anything that they could use to continue helping them survive on Caesar's Rock. As time went on, this proved to be very successful, Blqck Ceasar even raking in a decent chunk of profits. Rumor has it that somewhere on Caesar's Rock, he buried over 26 bars of silver that has not been found to this day. There you go. That has not been found to this day. Of course, he and his best friend would part ways, and by part ways I mean they would try to kill each other because they ended up fighting over, you guessed it, a woman. When it came to plundering one of the ships, they ended up kidnapping a woman of just pure exotic beauty that both the sailor and Blqck Ceasar wanted this woman for themselves. They did not want to ransom her. They did not want to kill her. They wanted her for themselves. Of course, this caused a rift between them, and the two would end up fighting to the death, which Blqck Ceasar would eventually win, killing his best friend that has helped him throughout his pirating career over an exotic woman. Using some of the profits that Caesar raked in, he managed to actually hire a crew and even buy himself a ship. When it came to his pirating career, he was known for his cunning to the point, and by cunning and his knowledge, by cunning meaning his knowledge of the seas, especially the inward streams. One of the methods that he used when it came to escaping pirate hunters, which were groups of former pirates or soldiers of a European power that were tasked to hunt down pirates and just kill them. In some of the instances when his ship was being chased, he came up with this. He had the idea of his ship was narrow enough to squeeze into the rivers in between the islands and keys, and he developed a system of pulley ropes that he would he would temporarily sink his ship underneath the water of the river and just wait in hiding. And as whatever ship was pursuing them passed, they would raise the ship back up out of the water and sail the other way and continue their pirating. And he was also known as Blqck Ceasar embraced the very hedonistic embodiment of pirates, of the whole live life of pleasure. It is said that on Caesar's Rock, Blqck Ceasar had a harem that was made up of like 50 plus women, of women from women of English descent that they kidnapped, or women from runaway slave communities, or just anyone. He had a large harem of 50 plus women, and also he had children with some of these. And when it came to the other women of nobility, as well as men of nobility and even children, he established a prison there, which he would ransom them off later. One thing that he would regularly do, though, is that would basically hurt his profits, is as he went hunting, he would be gone for days on end, sometimes even weeks, to the point that there was no food on. There was not enough supplies to sustain the amount of people that was at Caesar's Rock, and half of his prisoners, as well as half of his harem, and sometimes half of his children would also die as well. His reputation would gain the attention of the notorious pirate captain Edward Thatch, aka Blackbeard. Blackbeard was known alongside Bartholomew Roberts, aka Black Bart, to hunt down slave ships and even recruit the slaves as members of his own pirate crew. He has seen firsthand on how ferocious and passionate of a fighter these slaves can be, to the point like, hey, these people are practically going to die for me. Might as well just see what use I can get out of them. But the difference was that he treated them like humans. He didn't bark orders around constantly. Upon meeting Blqck Ceasar and hearing the reputation that preceded him, Blackbeard made Blqck Ceasar one of his lieutenants aboard his flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. He gave Blqck Ceasar the job of, should the Queen Anne's Revenge ever come under siege and there's no hope in winning whatever battle that they were in, he was to go down below and light the keg reserve and blow up the Queen's Revenge and any other ship that was within the explosion radius. His career with Blackbeard, however, would be short-lived, because Britain would send a armada to basically hunt down Blackbeard, which, keep in mind, half of that armada would return, because the Queen's Revenge was basically a frigate. It was a huge warship, whereas most pirate ships, they mainly stuck with sloops or brigs, which could hold from 7 to 12 guns. Frigates could hold up to 20 plus cannons on them. Once Blackbeard died and a majority of his crew was killed, Blqck Ceasar began his descent down inside the ship to go ahead and light the keg fuse. However, some of Blackbeard's more cowardly crew members saw what he was doing, and they prevented him from blowing up the ship. And when the British went down below, they arrested all the surviving crewmates, including Blqck Ceasar. And of course, after hearing of Blqck Ceasar's crimes and all of that, instead of just being sent to a nearby slave plantation, he was sent to Virginia, where he was tried and hung of crimes of piracy. And one of the interesting things regarding Blackbeard's final days in his career, a majority of his pirate ship was nothing but African slaves. So, in the end, African pirates actually proved to be somewhat of a staple when it came to these pirate ships thriving during the Golden Age of Piracy. They proved to be valuable assets because, one, they could relate to. Granted, they could relate on an even deeper scale than just normal privateers who were just kidnapped and forced into servitude to serve on these ships. but again, they're still treated as humans. These slaves weren't treated as humans at all, and they would die trying. That they would rather die than have that humanity ripped away from them, which made them extremely passionate fighters. And as further evidence regarding Blqck Ceasar, he would later embody he would not, I shouldn't say embodied. I should say he would embrace the pirate stereotype that it's revenge against something, against a European power that wronged you, and that was what pirates' main theme was revenge. And African pirates served a key purpose on this. Sadly, there is not a lot of historical articles regarding these African pirates. There is the occasional mention of them, but again, most African pirates, when they were captured, they would just be sent back as slaves. And during the time, Britain, Spain, France, Portugal, they basically just write off the former slaves as just slaves. No one important. You don't need to know about it at all. But yeah, that is what my video is about, and I hope you enjoyed it and have a nice day.